It's the tipping point, and it's why a lot of the biochemical literature, like the animal-based toxicology literature, is wrong. People get TH2 dominant. Everything they eat is sending them into tizzy, yet they're getting an infection and the body's ignoring it. Raising up their NAD levels before he poisoned them with the methyl mercury, there was no damage at all. It's probably the most universal fixer-upper for us.
Welcome to the Melanie Avalon Biohacking Podcast, where we meet the world's top experts to explore the secrets of health, mindset, longevity, and so much more. Are you ready to take charge of your existence and biohack your life? This show is for you. Please keep in mind, we're not dispensing medical advice and are not responsible for any outcomes you may experience from implementing the tactics lying herein. Are you ready? Let's do this. Welcome back to the Melanie Avalon Biohacking Podcast. Today's episode, we are back with Dr. Chris Shade. We had a really popular episode all about mercury toxicity previously on this podcast, so I will put a link to that in the show notes. The show notes for today's episode will be at melanieavalon.com/NAD. And you really want to check out those show notes because I am so excited to announce that from here on out, these show notes will include transcripts. I've been wanting to do this for quite a while because I personally have benefited from reading transcripts from other podcasts, but this episode was so intense that I just realized it had to happen. So definitely check out the show notes for that. Dr. Shade is just such a wealth of information. He's the founder of Quicksilver Scientific. Once we hung up that other call, I knew I had to bring him back on. After that original call, he actually sent me some NMN to try, which is the precursor to NAD. And this was actually all at the time I had just started researching and appreciating the importance of NAD, especially given the work of David Sinclair, Dr. Rhonda Patrick, a lot of other podcasts I've been listening to. It was just perfect timing. Guys, I've started supplementing with NMN and insane. Just insane. We talk about it more in the episode, so I will stop there. But I think you will learn a lot in this episode. It is deep. It's probably the deepest dive I've had yet on this podcast, which I know is saying a lot. I did try throughout the episode to recap and synthesize it and make it slightly more digestible. So if you're a huge science geek biohacker, it totally may be your language already. If not, don't worry, keep listening because we do talk it out. But there's so much valuable information in here. I love it. And if you do want to try any of the Quicksilver products after listening to this, definitely use the link melanieavalon.com/Quicksilver. Using that link will get you 10% off any of the products. Today's episode is brought to you in part by Bioptimizers. Huge fan of that company, huge fan of those guys. I actually have a story about them. I'm going to tell it now. So I went to Whole Foods the other day. This was not like me normally, but I was having a little bit of sleep issues. So I was actually at Whole Foods when they opened at 7 a.m., which is very rare for me. But of course, I had on my blue blockers, which this is so perfect timing. I didn't even plan this. I will tell you more about blue blockers later in this podcast. But I had on my blue blockers. I was standing in line at the checkout, and this guy came up next to me. He goes, "Oh, I love those products." And I forgot I was wearing the shirt at first. And I was like, what? And then I remembered that I was wearing the shirt. And I was like, oh, really? Bioptimizers? And he was like, yeah. I was like, what products do you use? And he was like, I use the enzymes. They're great. Wade is the best. I was like, oh my goodness. I love Wade. So for listeners, Wade Lightheart is one of the founders of Bioptimizers. I had both him and Matt on the podcast. Fascinating conversation. Out of all the people I've interviewed in life on both this podcast and the Intermittent Fasting podcast, I've interviewed them the most, a total of 4 times, which is huge. Anyways, so back to the story. So the guy was like, I love Wade. And I was like, oh my goodness, I love Wade too. I've had him on my podcast. They sponsor my podcast. They're the best. He was like, yeah, I saw your blue blocking glasses. I saw your Bioptimizer shirt. And I was just like, she gets it. And then the next thing he said, friends, I am not making this up. This is a true story. The next thing he said was, have you heard of a company called Joovv? Man, sorry. It was just so funny. Yeah, I guess when you're into this whole biohacking thing, it all goes together. Joovv, by the way, they make fantastic red and near infrared light therapy devices. If you want to check them out, go to juve.com/MelanieAvalon. Using that link will get you a free gift from Juve. And also, if you use that link and forward your proof of purchase to podcast@MelanieAvalon.com, I will also send you a signed copy of my book, What When Wine. But anyways, going back to Bioptimizers. So yeah, I now want to wear my Bioptimizers shirt everywhere so I can find all the other crazy biohackers out there. But what is Bioptimizers? They are a company dedicated to fixing digestive problems. So if you've ever suffered from digestive issues, things like gas, bloating, cramping, all the things, one of the best things you can do for that is taking digestive enzymes. Bioptimizers, they make one of the most potent enzymes you can take on the market. It's called Masszymes. They only use the highest quality ingredients and their products work. And normally they offer a discount, but I've been so passionate about it, I was like, can we go one step above this? And they said yes. Right now, you can get a bottle of Masszymes for free. Yes, completely free. All you need to do is pay a small shipping fee. There is absolutely no catch, no tricks, no forced continuity, nothing to cancel. Basically, they're so confident that you're going to love it that they're just giving it away. Because then they know that you'll come back for more, because that's the way it works. A little bit about Masszymes. It is a 17 enzyme full spectrum formula. It has 5 different kinds of proteases. Those are what break down protein. It's also got something called Astrozyme. That's actually a proprietary all-natural plant-derived compound which boosts amino acid absorption by 30 to 60%. Cannot recommend enough that you jump on this offer. It's free, like I said, free. Just go to masszymes.com/MelanieFree. So that is MASSZYMES.com/MelanieFree, all one word. You will automatically get access to your unique coupon code to claim your free bottle. There is a limit of 1 per household, and this is, of course, only while supplies last, which you might want to hop on it now because who knows how long they're going to do this for. I love Masszymes. I love Bioptimizers. Clearly, all the biohackers randomly shopping at Whole Foods love Bioptimizers. Great things. I am a Himalaya partnered show, and if you follow me in the Himalaya app, you'll get early access to the show 24 hours in advance. So definitely check that out. Lastly, please join me in my Facebook community. That is Paleo OMAD Biohackers, Intermittent Fasting plus Real Foods plus Life. We can discuss everything there. If you have questions after this episode about NAD, NMN, Keto, Detox, all the things, definitely join me there. All right, so without further ado, please enjoy this fabulous conversation with Dr. Chris Shade. Hi, friends. Welcome back to the show. So actually, this is a first for this podcast. I am back with a repeat guest. So this is a first time, so you should be honored.
Oh, yeah.
I'm here with Dr. Chris Shade. He's the founder of Quicksilver Scientific, and we had a very, very popular episode. We went on to a lot of topics, but we really discussed mercury toxicity and detoxing and dealing with all of that. It was really fascinating, and I will put a link to it in the show notes. And Dr. Shade, he did go into his background pretty detailed in that episode, so definitely check it out. Dr. Shade, would you like to briefly tell listeners, for new listeners who haven't listened to that, a little bit about yourself and what brought you to Quicksilver Scientific?
Yeah, that's always a long and rambling episode as I, start back from birth and move through. But, I was born in a sort of reductionist scientific academic family. I went into environmental chemistry. I was kind of disillusioned with that. I went out, became an organic farmer, and I was really obsessed with natural cycles and ecology of the soil and everything that went into that. But I was a little before my time. I joked that I went out of business as an organic farmer the year that Whole Foods came into business, and that redirected me into a couple of things, but that got me into academics. I got a master's and a PhD in the environmental chemistry, first of agricultural nutrients, and then I went into the environmental chemistry of metals with particular focus in mercury. And as part of that, I developed what's called a mercury speciation analysis, where you're separating different forms of mercury, and we use that to look at blood, hair, and urine to look at the disposition, both the types of mercury in you, their transformations, and how you excrete them. And, that was technology for my PhD applied into clinical testing. And then I got involved in how do you get this stuff out of you? And at the time, I thought I would just use the chelators that were out there, like DMSA and DMPS. And I tried those, and they got me pretty well sicker and sicker and sicker. And so I wanted to understand a lot more of how the body's really supposed to deal with toxins and how it's supposed to get rid of them. And so that led me to understanding how the glutathione system works and how the general detoxification system works, and making supplement systems designed to amplify that and get things out. And to make that really work, I had to make specialized delivery systems. So a delivery system is a way you get something from out of your body to inside and into the blood. And like a capsule is a delivery system, a liquid is. But we had to get to specialized things it's a family of particles actually called lipid nanoparticles. And that includes liposomes, which you use. They're like tiny little cells made out of phosphatidylcholine, and you use them to deliver water-soluble nutrients because they can passively diffuse through the oral cavity and upper GI right into circulation. And then for fat solubles, we use nanoemulsions. They're like little oil droplets wrapped in phosphatidylcholine, and we use those for things like vitamin D or CBD. And we got so good at those delivery systems, and we got so good at handling detoxification using these delivery systems that we started looking into other problems and other aspects of health. And most recently, we're very obsessed with metabolism and clean metabolism and bioenergetics, including what will be kind of the core of today's discussion, raising NAD levels.
Oh my goodness, so much there. I remember this happened last time. I was like, so many things. Friends, this is why we needed a part 2.
So much to unpack.
Yeah, because the first episode was going to be about mercury, and then there was just so many potential rabbit holes to go on. Okay, so to start things off, this is like a very basic question, but I would like to get your general idea on it. Detox is discussed so much, from so many sources, how to properly detox, what's the right protocol to go on. I'm often so torn between wanting to be really natural and intuitive. Like my body should be able to just detox naturally. On the other side, I'm like, no, I need to do all the things perfectly to make detox perfect. How should one approach this idea of detox? Are our bodies capable of adequately detoxing, or do we really need to use, supplements and such to get things going correctly?
Right. And so, as one of my old spiritual teachers said, regarding is it totally natural or is it totally controlled? It's both. And you should start with a detox protocol, one of the different protocols that we put together, because it addresses all the different aspects of detoxification. But as you go through, I always say to people they should do a formal detox, and then they should start incorporating detoxification into their lifestyle. And the formal really shows you the way, and it hits every aspect that needs to be hit and ensures that everything's going to happen. Now, along the way of doing that, you're going to generate a more intuitive understanding of which parts of that are the most important. Is it using bitters and PC to activate the bile flow? And you find whenever you take those bitters, wow, you just feel really good. That's a big thing for me. Other people will be like, you know what? Whenever I take that glutathione, it just lights me up, meaning they're deficient in glutathione. And so you're going to find what it is that you really need to do, that you need more help with than, say, one other person. So if there's 5 things you got to hit, we'll hit all 5 in a formal protocol. But then over time, you'll figure out that 3 of those are really big for you, and one of them's crucial. And you're going to start integrating that into your life that way. In fact, in our sort of application to health, we say restore, maintain, advance. And restore will be systematically removing toxins, microbes through these protocols. Maintain is once you've figured out, you know what? These 3 things are really important for me all the time, and you integrate them into your life on some intermittent schedule. And then advance is where we're trying to take everything to a higher level. And that's really where we're getting to today, is things like AMPK activation and NAD levels. So does that help you with that?
Yeah, it does. And actually, so speaking to that, because you're talking about how you feel after these things, which ties into, okay, so many things as far as your intuitive response. For example, you're talking about at the beginning, detoxing from mercury with these pharmaceutical agents, DMPS, DMSA. So for listeners who are unfamiliar, I personally struggled with extreme mercury toxicity, very extreme. And I did a very long run of pharmaceutical chelation. And at the time, and the way this ties into the intuition thing and my confusion is at the time when I would do these, detox agents, they made me feel really good, like while I was detoxing. But I feel like since then, I don't want to say wrecked myself because I feel like I'm always, getting stronger and stronger, but trying to heal. But it's like you said, with your experience, it definitely did a number on me. And then that's where I struggle with this idea of how to interpret reaction to things. And then, for example, you talked about AMPK activators. And after our last discussion, you were so kind. You sent me the mercury try test, which listeners, I am now making that my go-to recommendation for testing your mercury levels or your mercury toxicity status, because I've realized, especially from my own research and then talking with Dr. Shade, how severely misleading conventional mercury testing might be. So if you want to check your mercury status, definitely get that kit. I'll have links to everything in the show notes. Now I'm on so many tangents. Anyways.
One of the things you were getting at is, tying together intuitive and organized. And so I would say, while you were doing your chelators, you were feeling better, but then you crashed afterward because that's the myopic aspect of the chelators is they do bind mercury. And so when you're in an acute toxicity stage, they can pull some of that away, but they're not supporting the healing of your detoxification system. And that's the liver and its interaction with, or its coupling to bile flow and the GI being able to move things out, and also the function of the kidneys. And so while they might bind up some of the mercury, they're not increasing the body's resilience to the mercury that's left. And the myopic part is people think, oh, there's this mercury here and it's causing all of my problems, but why was the mercury there? I mean, I would doubt that you were more exposed than a lot of other people, but the combination between your exposure level and your body's ability to resist the attack of the metal, both at a cellular level, meaning its cellular antioxidant defenses, and a systemic level, meaning the liver and kidneys' ability to filter out the blood levels and keep those down. That was not working very well. And so you were very susceptible to the toxicity of the mercury. And the DMSA helped you, but that was not coupled to things that would fix the overall detox system, so that it couldn't just take that out and then leave you down on the ground and you're good to fend for yourself after that.
Yeah, I definitely learned so much from the experience. People often ask me now, they're like, what should I do? How should I address mercury toxicity? And I'm like, I have learned a lot. Think long and hard before you go the pharmaceutical chelation route, because I don't know that I would do that again, or at least not to the extent that I did.
I mean, we tell people you start with ours, and if you want to overlay some DMSA or DMPS, you can do that. And Hal Huggins used to do that with our stuff, and Hyman's group does that. But you have to start with rehabilitation of the detoxification and antioxidant system with special focus on the glutathione aspects. And then you can put a little quickening agent on top in the form of the chelators.
I like that idea a lot. I like it. And so speaking to things like glutathione and NAD and all of these things, so lots of stuff to tackle. Maybe we could start with just a general overview. And I know it's hard to do general of something that's so intense. Just a general overview of how our body actually creates energy and regarding the mitochondria. And because I feel like that's a baseline topic to understand, so you can understand how these other things might be affecting energy generation in the body.
Sure. And there's actually a lot that'll all come together here, including the mercury stuff. And so how do we make energy? So We make energy in the mitochondria by oxidizing carbon substrates, and those can be lipids or carbohydrates. They're all taken down to chunks that go into the Krebs cycle or the citric acid cycle. And NAD along the way is doing the oxidizing. So NAD is in two forms. There's the oxidized NAD plus and the reduced NADH. And so at different stages in the Krebs cycle, electrons are coming off of these carbon substrates and onto the NAD along with a hydrogen. And so that NAD is turning to NADH and in the process oxidizing or stripping away those carbon substrates. Then that NADH is taken into oxidative phosphorylation, also known as the electron transport chain, where it dumps off the electrons and the hydrogen, and they run through a series of high energy handoffs along the electron transport chain. The hydrogen, now as the form of a proton, is pushed outside of the membrane of the mitochondria or the outside of the inner membrane until it builds up enough to come slingshotting back through ATP synthase and generate ATP. So energy is coming off of the carbon. Remember, that was originally from the sun. It's coming off of the carbon, going through the electron transport chain, driving this movement of protons that then turns over ATP generation. And in the process, the NAD has become NADH, and then it goes back to NAD, and it goes back over to grab more electrons from more carbon substrates. And so that's pretty cool. Now, if you're low on NAD, or if it's heavily in the reduced form, now you're not going to be able to oxidize those substrates so well. And instead of burning up energy, you are going to start to store it more as fat, thinking that maybe later you can burn it up. So what gets in the way of that? So naturally, not having enough NAD gets in the way of that. But there's a bigger problem, and it's also related to NAD, and it's called decoupling of the electron transport chain. So in the electron transport chain, there's all these proteins that are assembled together into this chain. And when we think of proteins being made of the cell, we think of a gene in the nucleus being transcribed and turned on to RNA, and then it going out to a ribosome, and you make that protein. And we think all of our genes are in the nucleus, but the mitochondria has genes of its own. And in fact, 13 of the subunits of the electron transport chain are encoded within the mitochondria. And so the mitochondria has to make exactly the same number of protein units as the nucleus is making, so that when they come into the mitochondria and get all zipped together, everything is in balance. But what happens over time as we age is that the mitochondrial DNA is not turning over, it's not being replicated fast, or not being transcribed fast enough, and it's not making enough of these subunits. They've got to be made in what's called a stoichiometric equivalent, like a 1-to-1 equivalent. But then all of a sudden, you're only getting half a unit out from the mitochondria and a whole unit from the nucleus. And when they assemble the electron transport chain, something's missing. So there's electrons go in and they're zipping along these handoffs, and all of a sudden there's something not there to pick it up. It's like a relay race, and the guy's got the baton and there's no one to catch it. And instead, he just throws the baton into the crowd and hits someone over the head. And that is the electrons then spinning out of the transport chain and becoming instead free radicals. And so at that point, you're failing to make ATP, and instead you're making more free radical damage. And so you think, well, why don't they communicate together and make the same number of things? Well, it turns out it's NAD's indirect responsibility to keep them communicating. When the NAD levels are high enough in the nucleus, there is a messenger called TFAM that gets sent out from the nucleus to the mitochondria to ensure that they're on the same page in transcribing units of the electron transport chain. And so that's something that happens with aging, is this incomplete oxidation and excess free radical generation. But when you bring the NAD levels up, all of a sudden that's fixed. And it's fixed through the agency of something called a sirtuin that is in the nucleus. And sirtuins will come up again and again in this as we talk about NAD and AMPK, because sirtuins are what we know as one of the longevity genes. And they're a super important one to longevity. And in fact, that sort of came into the parlance around when Sinclair found resveratrol, because resveratrol is a sirtuin activating compound. And so it was like, oh, well, resveratrol can make us live longer by sirtuin activation. But sirtuins can't be activated properly unless NAD levels are high enough. And in fact, there's two different things that happen regarding NAD and mitochondrial efficiency. The first of one we just talked about, and that's having the stoichiometric equivalence in the electron transport chain. And then there's a second one, and that's the activation of something called PGC1 alpha. And PGC1 alpha then stimulates mitochondrial biogenesis, which is creating more mitochondria and more mitochondrial density within a cell. And so when is one or the other of these processes going to happen? When you're in a fed state, so this is going to come down to fed and fasted. We'll be talking about keto and fasting. And in the keto state and the fasted state, you have something called AMPK activation. And AMPK activation starts PGC1 alpha's activation to make mitochondrial biogenesis, but then it is finished by NAD activating a sirtuin to deacetylate the PGC1A and enable mitochondrial biogenesis. So assuming there's enough NAD during fasted or keto states, you stimulate more mitochondria to be made. But during the fed state, say you have carbohydrates on board, then the NAD is essential for ensuring the equivalency between the nuclear and mitochondrial production of the electron transport chain.
Oh my goodness. Okay. So a lot here to unpack. Okay. So for listeners, I'm going to ask some basic questions and
We'll go back over all that.
I'm going to try to paint like a very basic picture. Can you let me know if this is correct?
Yep.
So in the mitochondria and this creation of free radicals and oxidative stress and the dysregulation with the electron transport chain, is that basically occurring because there is excess fuel that's not either excess fuel or there's fuel not being used properly?
Well, it's not being used properly. It's not because you need less fuel. It's because you need more NAD. And let's call it a reckless electron transport chain is leading to damage instead of energy. And it gets reckless when the NAD levels are too low to support the communication between the nucleus and the mitochondria.
So is it kind of like, have you seen that really famous I Love Lucy scene with the chocolates on the conveyor belt?
I have. Now I can't remember all the specifics of it.
I guess it's a concept as well. There's all the conveyor belt is like constantly moving. There's the chocolates on the conveyor belt. And then basically she's doing stuff with the chocolates on the conveyor belt, but she gets to this point where she can't keep up with the chocolates anymore because she's the one kind of making sure it's all, going correctly.
Yeah.
Would she kind of be like the NAD in that situation? Because once she stops, managing and like making sure everything is going correctly with this movement of chocolates, kind of like the movement of energy with the mitochondria.
Right. It just gets totally out of hand.
So is NAD like making sure that the energy is being used properly without creating these free radicals and oxidative stress? Or is it combating the oxidative stress once it occurs?
Well, it's doing all of those actually. So NAD1 is ensuring that you're able to oxidize the carbon substrates. And when it goes down, yes, then in that way, there'll be too much carbon substrate. You'll get too much reduced NAD, and you're not able to activate the sirtuin to keep the communication control going. So I said no to your first suggestion that too much fuel can do this, but it is true that too much fuel can add to that, especially carbohydrate fuel. But then it's also that when the NAD is providing energy to the nucleus to be able to do the controlling.
Okay, gotcha. The reason I was thinking that about too much fuel is I was thinking, well, you can't have free radicals if there's nothing to create a free radical. It almost requires fuel for all of this to happen.
Yeah. And so too much carb can do that by the NAD. Remember, it's in the NAD plus and the NADH roles, both of them at once. And if you have to oxidize, because you have to oxidize the carbs more than the lipids. And so you're generating more NADH there. Once your NADH levels are going up and you can't get them all through the electron transport chain and they accumulate, they can't activate the sirtuins anymore. It's only NAD plus that does that. Now, on the free radical control side, NAD also partitions into something called NADP. So NAD you want primarily oxidized as NAD, not NADH, and it's driving oxidative metabolism. NADP you want primarily reduced as NADPH, and it's driving reductive metabolism. It's the thing that's re-reducing glutathione when it gets oxidized, ascorbate when it gets oxidized, thyroidoxin when it gets oxidized. So without a high level of the NADPH, you can't keep up with the free radical generation, and the NADPH is in direct relationship to how much NAD there is.
Okay, that is fascinating. And now I think I finally understand why, because they always say that carbohydrate or glucose-based diets create more oxidative stress than potentially, ketogenic diets. That would make sense what you said about the oxidative potential of carbs versus fats. I have a huge question based on something that you said. You were talking about the genes actually within the mitochondria. So is that what causes the potential changes in mitochondria as to how efficiently they are processing fats versus carbs? Like, people talk about becoming metabolically flexible and then like how your mitochondria have to adjust to different fuel substrates if you make a dietary change. Is it the genes within the mitochondria determining that?
Oh, that's a great question, Melanie. Having a lot of AMPK activation is what's stimulating the gene sets for fat metabolism to be expressed more. And that includes gene sets for ketone transport. Now, where are all those gene sets located? Are they on the nucleus or are they in the mitochondria? And is that one of the problems? And I do not know the answer to that.
Yeah, that's so fascinating.
But now I'm going to go look.
So a do list. But I guess a broader question that maybe we can answer or sort of answer, is it those genes though that is determining that ability of the mitochondria to quote learn how to primarily run on a new substrate and then efficiently run on that substrate? Is that tied to the genetic changes in the cell, or is it tied to literally a functioning in the cell independent of the genes?
No. It'll be dependent on, there'll be genes for expressing, say, adipose triglyceride lipase, which is breaking up adipose and mobilizing it so you can turn it into ketones. There'll be genes for the transporters for the ketones. All of these are inducible, and I think it's just you haven't been using them, so they're not readily activated. It's almost like they're closed up deep in the book, and you have to open them up. And once you've been using them a lot, you keep them kind of like in the short. It's like you keep them on your desktop instead of like buried way deep in a hard drive somewhere. So once you're using genes more often, they become more readily inducible. And you may have them always sort of active to some degree. I think that's really what that's coming down to, is that fat adaptation. That was the thing with keto before 6, is people seem to fat adapt then within almost no time at all. I mean, it makes people make ketones in a few hours, and very soon they seem to be very metabolically flexible. And so there are activators. Nuclear transcription factors are sort of master activators for genes, and they go right into the gene you need and just pull it right out and activate it right away. And so these sort of super activators are the things that you need to get going to get metabolically flexible quickly. And turned out that nutraceuticals delivered in these nanoparticles could induce those really fast, faster than just diet and exercise does.
So after our last conversation, you were so kind. You sent me a bottle of your Keto Before 6, which has a lot of AMPK activating compounds. And it's funny because, so I'm also the co-host of the Intermittent Fasting podcast. And on that podcast, we have like a mentality, because we have a very large audience who are, very new, experienced, and people new to intermittent fasting. But we have like kind of like a blanket idea of when you're first trying intermittent fasting, just do, water and black coffee, don't add other things. We call it the quote clean fast. So my co-host Jim would probably freak out at the idea of taking something else that's not water or black coffee while fasting. But so I only talk about it on this podcast.
Come on, man. It's what you're trying to get, not what you're trying to put in. You're trying to get an effect.
Exactly. Because if you're taking in these compounds, which are actually stimulating all of these pathways, which fasting is stimulating, I think it's a much more complicated picture than does this break my fast or not? I think there's a lot going on. But in any case, so I received the bottle of Keto Before 6, and my personal experience was I had like a very intuitive response to it where it was the first time that I took it while fasting, because I've had ideas of trying a longer fast in the past, but it's never seemed like possible to me. And I remember the first time I took it, I don't know, something changed. And I was like, you know what? I could probably fast longer with this. So it was a really, really interesting experience. And I've actually been taking it every day, and I reordered it twice. So I do really appreciate it. So what it has in it has resveratrol, which we discussed. For listeners, we mentioned David Sinclair and his work on resveratrol. I actually did interview him on this podcast. So for listeners, I'll put a link to that in the show notes. But yeah, Keto Before 6 has the resveratrol. It has, you said berberine, which has amazing effects on, blood sugar, glucose regulation. Has the quercetin. It was really kind of nice because it was like two birds with one stone, because I'd been taking quercetin separately. It has milk thistle in it, I believe, separately. And I was like, hey, now I can just get it all
in one. It has DIM too.
Yep. I will put a link to all of this in the show notes. I do have a question though about the delivery systems, because you were speaking at the beginning about, liposomal delivery, liposomes for water soluble versus fat solubles, and using the nano emulsions with that. So when taking the compounds in those various states, is that all? Because I know for like the supplements, it'll often suggest that you hold it, in your mouth for like 90 seconds or something and then swallowing it. So the absorption of those, is it primarily occurring in the mouth and the GI tract? Can it be absorbed topically? That's a huge question I have.
Yeah, you do like to have the topical rapamycin. And yes, all these are true. It absorbs in the mouth. It absorbs in the stomach, in the upper GI. You're trying to fast forward the absorption, and that's why you hold in the mouth, which incidentally, the oral holding is more important for the liposomes, the water soluble, than the nanoemulsion, but that's a fine detail. And yes, these can be done topically too. In fact, liposomes were first used in cosmetics, and they can penetrate across the skin layers. In fact, we have a whole series of serums that we're working on right now.
So can all of them be done topically? So I've also been taking, I know we talked about your Keto Before 6 for AMPK activation. The big one you sent me that I'm loving beyond belief, to go back to NAD, is you sent me your NAD Gold, which is NMN, a precursor to NAD, which we can discuss. I've been experiencing so many benefits from that.
Well, that stuff's crazy.
Building up my NAD levels.
And doing it, the first thing I was doing for myself was the Keto Before 6, and then I got to doing the NAD, and I was so amazed with what Keto Before 6 did for me, and then I added in the NAD, and I'm like, I cannot believe where I'm at now.
I've just noticed a huge change, and I know it's like subjective, but just like a change in my feeling of more resilience and more just energy.
Yeah, it's not just energy. You can eat more different foods and not feel weird after them. You drink coffee and you feel awake from it, not foggy. There's this whole organization of your energy production at a mitochondrial level, an adrenal level, and your immune system and your brain. It's just like, wow, it all got zipped up. It was all seemed to be, falling off the ledge to the right or to the left at any moment. And now it's just like straight down the middle.
Yeah. And for listeners, if you're wondering what supports NAD, what depletes NAD, like how do you get to this state of, needing to boost up your NAD? Well, we know stress is a huge one for that. And I can't even imagine with all of my mercury and detox what I probably did to my NAD levels. Something I found really fascinating about NAD is it's so important in the body that Rhonda Patrick was talking about this, was that It's so important. And it could, in theory, we could get it from food, but we would never be able to create enough. So that's why there's a whole salvage and like a recycling pathway of it, because we just need to be able to use it all the time. But that's why you can take these NAD precursors. The ones people might be familiar with is NR as well as NMN. I always have to say it slow. It's hard to say, which is the one in that NAD gold. Would you like to tell listeners a little bit about the difference between NR and NMN and how they serve as precursors to NAD so listeners can build back up their NAD stores?
And actually, right before I do that, let me just go back and round out something you were just saying about how NAD levels go down. And I want to tie it back into the mercury thing, and then we'll talk about how to build it all up. And so what lowers NAD levels, and all these things primarily work on the enzymes that are making NAD and damage the enzymes that are making NAD. But any inflammatory processes, infections, and toxins all work to some degree to lower your NAD levels. But there was this cool study where this guy was using these little worms that are used for basic biochemistry and poisoning them with methylmercury. And when he did that, he saw that he damaged the mitochondria. The amount of live mitochondria went down and their activity went down. Now, then when he measured NAD, of course, the methylmercury diminished the NAD levels. Now, how is he going to fix this? What he did was bring the NAD, and there was also there was a lowering of glutathione levels and an increase in oxidative damage. So what he did then is he started raising up their NAD levels before he poisoned them with the methylmercury, and then there was no damage at all, because the NAD was keeping the excess, like the supplemental NAD was keeping the glutathione system activated, and then the glutathione system could work out all of the excess mercury, could get rid of it all. And this is where that partitioning of NAD into NADPH is important. The NADPH was keeping glutathione in the reduced state as it was trying to accommodate all the oxidative stress, and the high levels of NAD were able to generate a lot of ATP for the glutathione synthesis and the glutathione conjugation and the toxin transporters all to work. So there's this, when I do my NAD talk, I like using this Bible quote from Matthew, and this guy wrote a book about the Matthew effect, and it's this quote that says, "To those who have shall be given more and shall have abundance, and to those who have not, even the last bit they have shall be taken away." So there's this knife edge sort of below this certain level. You don't have enough NAD to handle the onslaught, and everything just goes to hell on you. Whereas above a certain level, you're able to generate more ATP and make more NAD, and you're able to recycle more NAD, and you're able to make the glutathione that keeps you protected from the environmental stress. And there was even some data showing in there that when the NAD levels were high enough, the methylmercury exposure was actually a hormetic tonic to the worm and strengthened various processes. Whereas when the NAD levels were lower, the methylmercury then was a toxin and killed the worm.
That is so fascinating. And I think it can explain or, help us understand so much why people can get in things like, chronic illness situations, because it's like, I was talking actually when I had David Sinclair on about this same thing, like the Sirtuins, because we were talking about how, when you have this damage, the Sirtuins get, they go and kind of like fix things, but sometimes they get actually lost and don't actually come back to where they're supposed to be. And it's like the more damage you experience, the more it just crashes and burns. It so makes sense why people may feel like it's like you can be okay and like be dealing with things. But then once that tipping point happens, like you talked about with like the knife, it's like you can get into this point where when you don't have the resources to recover, then clearly everything's just going to keep getting up.
It is. It's the tipping point. And it's why a lot of the biochemical literature, like the animal-based toxicology literature, is wrong. They take this completely healthy young mouse and they have to give it like tons of mercury before it gets super, super sick. And then you got some human that's been living and stringing itself along in this screwed up environment, and you give it a little bit and it goes over the edge.
So true. I've been doing a lot of research on skincare, for example, and all of the potential things that we are exposed to in like skincare, cosmetics, makeup. Ladies are often putting that on their skin every single day. And it's like all of the testing is, testing for these individual compounds. It's like what happens when we apply this individual compound at one time, on one cell and see what happens in this small amount. It doesn't take into account the fact that you're exposed to multiple compounds. You're exposed to that compound from multiple places. There's the cocktail effect. There's the synergistic effect. It just doesn't work that way.
No, it doesn't. And so that's why this is such a sensitive thing and such an important thing to get right.
Hi guys, I hope you're enjoying the show. So you guys know that I'm obsessed with hacking light exposure to make it the most, quote, natural and healing possible. I've talked a ton about red light therapy, but now we're going to look at the other side of the spectrum, blue light. Blue light is actually high energy light, and it's responsible for a lot of great things like waking you up, keeping you alert, supporting cognition, etc. So what's the problem? Well, in the natural pre-modern world, we'd be exposed to blue light naturally during the day. It would keep us awake, then it was gone at night and all was good. But now we're exposed to it all the time, thanks to artificial and fluorescent lighting, LEDs, and especially looking at computer and phone screens all the time. So no longer is blue light just a wonderful thing that illuminates our life. Now it can potentially become overwhelming and can actually mess with your circadian rhythm, hinder your sleep, increase strain on your eyes, lead to anxiety and insomnia, encourage headaches, and so much more. So what's the solution? Blue light blocking glasses. As the day is winding down, I start with clear ones that don't really interfere with color, but do block a good percentage of blue light. Then I transition to more orange ones that filter out even more. And finally, right before bed, I put on red ones that completely block blue. And it's kind of crazy. The instant sleepiness feeling when you put these on, it's just insane. In fact, there are very few things that I would probably freak out if they were taken away from me. One is my planner. The other is all of these different glasses. And I thought I was being really special ordering these glasses from different companies to make my own unique routine, but it turns out there's a company called Blue Blocks that makes all of these. So I'm obsessed. Blue Box offers advanced light filtering eyewear that can help you tackle this blue light problem and really improve your sleep and health. They have computer glasses with a clear lens to combat digital eye strain. So that's great when you're working at a computer all day. They've also got yellow summer glow lens that block out even more blue light. That's great for anxiety, depression, migraines, low mood. And then of course they've got their signature Sleep Plus lens to wear right before bedtime. Like I said, blocking out all the blue, super effective. They come in non-prescription and prescription and reader's forms, so you can get whatever you personally need for your glasses. And okay, it gets even better. For every pair of Blue Blocks glasses that you buy, Blue Blocks actually donates a pair of reading glasses to someone in need in the developing world. So not only are you helping your own health, you're helping someone else live a happier, healthier life as well. I love Blue Blocks. Super grateful that they're supporting this podcast. And you can get 15% off any purchase. Just go to blueblocks.com and enter the code MelanieAvalon at checkout. So that's BLUBLOX.com and enter the code MelanieAvalon at checkout for 15% off. One more thing before we do jump back in. We're talking a lot about detox in this episode. Do you know what is one of our most common sources of daily toxic exposure? That would be our skincare, because most of us put things on our skin each and every day that actually has toxic ingredients in it. Because the US government has almost no regulation for skincare and cosmetics. Do you want to know what's even crazier? If a skincare or makeup item is found to be actually toxic, like if there's a study saying that it could cause cancer or that there are overwhelming toxic levels of some chemical in it, the government has no power to withdraw it from the market. That is shocking. So what do? Thankfully, there is a company called Beauty Counter. I am obsessed with them because they are revolutionizing the skincare and makeup world. They make amazing skincare and makeup products that are tested to be safe for your skin, so you can feel super comfortable about what you're putting on. Plus, their products really work. Their skincare products are great for supporting your skin health, and their makeup is fantastic. I cannot recommend enough that you check them out. I'm obsessed with them. I want everybody else to be obsessed with them because they're just doing so much for our world. You can shop with me at beautycounter.com/MelanieAvalon, and using that link will make something really special happen after your first order. And if you'd like to know what that really special magical thing is, just get on my Clean Beauty email list. That's at MelanieAvalon.com/cleanbeauty. On that list, you'll also receive exclusive discounts and special giveaways from me, and so much more. All right, now back to the show.
Then that takes us to how do we get it there? Now, if you're hip to a little bit of vitamin chemistry, you know that NAD is nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, and that nicotinamide signifies it as a vitamin B3 form. In fact, it's the super activated, fully composed and brought together elevated version of vitamin B3. And so what are the lower levels of vitamin B3? You've got niacin, nicotinic acid, and then you have a slightly higher level called nicotinamide. Now, how do we make NAD? We can make NAD from those two vitamins, which you can get from food. And if you're not getting any of those vitamins, you can do this longer pathway called the de novo pathway, where you're taking it from tryptophan, an amino acid. So taking it from niacin is called the Price-Handler pathway. And eventually, say we take some niacin, we turn it into NAD, and we use the NAD to activate a sirtuin or to repair a gene, or CD38, which fixes tight junctions, then it forms nicotinamide. And so the broken, or the sort of, after you've donated the energy of NAD, your NAM, nicotinamide. Then you have the salvage pathway to turn it back into NAD. So why can't we just take lots of vitamin B3? Well, all those stressors, those environmental stressors, could just be age, inflammation, toxins, any different stressor. They work on the enzymes that are taking nicotinamide or niacin up to NAD. Now, on its way up to NAD, it has to go to NMN. And it can also go to NR, nicotinamide riboside, which until now was the most popular NAD precursor. And NR becomes NMN, and then it becomes NAD. The enzymes that take NR to NMN or NMN to NAD do not get so affected by environmental stressors. So those are the easiest to drive right into NAD, and that happens pretty much without a hitch. So those are the ones that you want. And you've got NR and NMN, so why would you use one over the other? Now, you used to use NR over NMN because the guys who sold you NR told you that NMN was too big to get into the cell and there was no transporter to get it in there. Now, when you go into the research world, like Sinclair's world, they had not found the transporter that moves NMN around cell to cell, into the GI or into the blood from the GI. They didn't know what was doing it, but they strongly suspected it was being done. And a lot of these guys were doing animal studies with NMN and getting fantastic results in reversing aging in animals that was very consistent with the NAD levels being raised. And so Sinclair always believed there was one, but the guys who make NR kept saying, no, it can't be used. But then last February, 2019, Japanese researcher Imai found the transporter, and it was heralded, it was in Science, and there was an article from Sinclair saying, at long last, the elusive transporter has been found, and it's in the GI tract, it's in the cells, it's everywhere. And indeed, NMN is a great way to raise NAD. And so that's what we used was NMN, and we mixed it with some trimethylglycine, which I'm sure we'll get into talking about methylation, why we need to balance methylation with NAD levels. But we put those two together and we put them into a nanoliposome to increase their absorption, because this stuff is expensive. And even though you have a transporter for it, which means you can absorb it, it doesn't mean that you won't saturate the transporter and not be able to absorb it anymore. And indeed, that's the case. And using the liposome our first data set was 4.25-fold increase in bioavailability. So a 425% increase in bioavailability off of just taking an NMN powder. So like Sinclair takes a gram of NMN a day. I take 100 to 200 milligrams a day with an occasional foray into 500 or 600, but generally 1 to 200 milligrams in this liposome, and I get all the benefits that I need.
I love that so much. And really quick question, can we measure NAD levels in the body?
So, yes, but very difficult thing to do. And so NAD, we have equipment that can do it, but we're moving from one lab to another. And when we get this over here, we're going to be doing a lot of NAD measurements. And in fact, Joe Mercola is also setting up to do the NAD measurement. We've been working together on this project to get you want to measure NMN, NR, NAD, and he's got a guy who's got a similar machine and he's working it all out. We learned the original techniques from Nady Brady over in Australia. And so we hope to do a lot more measurement, but it's not something that it's like, oh yeah, I'm going to go down to LabCorp and get my NAD level measured.
It's pretty exciting. One more quick follow-up question. So given the idea, or now that we know that there is the transporter for NMN, which maybe this is just me, but I feel like, wouldn't it be obvious that there has to be a transporter since NMN was serving as a precursor in the body to NAD, or can things serve as...
No, the way they were drawing the diagrams was that when you're moving it cell to cell, it moves as NR, and then inside the cell, it moves to NMN and then to NAD. And so they didn't understand the mechanism, how you could move it around your body.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
So they're like, well, you move it as NR, and then you turn it to NMN, and then you turn it to NAD.
Okay, gotcha. Given the fact that we now know there is the transporter, do you prefer NMN over NR? I mean, I know you chose it, but...
The reason is Chromadex, that owns the license on using nicotinamide riboside, license that to us. They have it tied up, and Thorne has the license into the practitioners market. Now, they used to control the supply of NR, but then the Chinese started making it and supplying it to other people. So I could get it from the Chinese and hope I'm not breaking some use patent that Chromadex has. And they own it. I mean, it was done at Harvard, and so then it was sold to Chromadex, and they sell now the True Niagen, and they sell some stuff through Thorne too. So NMN is what there was no intellectual property around it, so I was able to get that. We're doing deeper studies to see which one is actually more efficacious. I'm sure, if NR turns out to win in some way. Now, see, the thing is, NR now you can't get in a liposome, and so it would have to be, 5-6-fold better absorbed than NMN to get past, the advantage we have from using the liposome. Plus, then there's this really cool advantage in that the body actually traffics different elements of the NAD system in liposomes. And so the cells are actually tuned they're called extracellular vesicles, and the cells are actually tuned to recognize vesicles with NMN or NR in them. And so theoretically, they have a higher uptake into the cell. Now, we don't know for sure how all that works, but the body is already trafficking stuff in these little liposomes that are made in the cell.
I have a super random, very personal question I'm just wondering about. Using sunflower how do you say it? Lecithin?
And yeah, lecithin is the crude stuff that comes out of the oil pressing, and then we refine out of that phosphatidylcholine.
Okay, so with the supplements, and this is literally just coming from my insane craziness when I'm researching polyunsaturated fats, like omega-6, omega-3, is that even at all a thing in sunflower lecithin? Like, is it even a PUFA, or is it?
Yeah, it is. It is. It's the same oil as sunflower oil. The fatty acids are the same. And so, the one thing, I take so many damn liposomes, I'm like, I need a little bit more omega-3. And so I'll take a little omega-3. And recently we got phospholipids from krill, which are all omega-3. And we are going to do a little blending of omega-6 and omega-3 phospholipids in making the particles.
Oh, that would be really exciting, because that would be like 3 birds with one stone or 4 birds.
It's a flock of geese with one stone.
Yeah, I know. All the birds. And then just so I don't forget, so I know I already asked about the topical absorption, but with the NMN, the NAD gold that you make, so could I be using that topically?
Yeah, it really works. I've done that for sure. You're not going to slather your whole body with it. It's a little expensive, but you do it around your eyes and it like really tightens things up. The best stuff we have for skin, the C-Lipoic and the NAD gold are the best too. Glutathione is really good too, especially if you do like a dermapen. In fact, with any of them, you can do like a dermapen or something like that, microneedling and do even better. But I just do them topically. The liposomes, you put them on, you want to leave them like 15, 20 minutes, and then you can just blot them with a hot, wet washcloth, and that'll take the sticky residue off. Now, the serums that we're making are designed not to have any residue at all. And of course, we have one with NMN in it. We have C, we have lipoic acid, we have AMPK activators. We have all kinds of cool stuff coming in the topicals range. So make sure to hassle me about getting samples of that.
Oh, I will. But with the topical absorption of one of the ones that's intended to be oral absorption, would that just be a local effect, or could I still get the systemic benefits?
A little bit will go systemic, yeah. We don't know exactly how much, and the smaller they are, the more will go systemic, but we definitely have seen that. I was working with the delivery systems with hormones, and we were able to see the topical stuff go in pretty quick.
Okay. Because I know when people use progesterone creams and things like that people can regulate a lot their hormone system.
Yeah. You're getting systemic from that. Yeah. You're getting both.
Okay, I might have to do some experimenting here. I need like an unlimited supply of NMN just like everywhere. Okay, so another question, because you've talked about actually one more NAD NMN question before we leave that topic. You do formulate it with TMG, and I know that partly relates to concerns about methylation. Would you like to talk a little bit about that? Is there a risk of, burning through your methyls with supplementation?
Yeah, there's a risk. And it's not a problem at all, though, because you're just going to balance it. And so go back to, reverse in your head, 5-6 years to when MTHFR was all the thing. And everyone was into having, methylfolate, naphthalinic acid. And they would say, oh, but if you over-methylate, then you can just block that with niacin. And there was also this fear that niacin was going to suck all your methyl groups out and you were going to die from undermethylation because methylation was everything and that's all there was. Well, why was this relationship between niacin and methyl groups? It's because, if you recall just a couple of minutes ago, we were talking about when you use NAD to activate a sirtuin. There's this high energy bond from the nucleotide going to the sirtuin to turn over the sirtuin, and you're left with NAM, nicotinamide. All right. So nicotinamide sticks to the sirtuin, is actually a negative regulator of it. It's an inhibitor of the sirtuin. So as long as the NAM, the nicotinamide, is stuck there to the sirtuin, it's blocking the sirtuin's activity. There are two ways to take it off of there. One is through the salvage pathway, where you regenerate NAD from the nicotinamide. The other is through methylation of the nicotinamide and then excretion of it. So you're going to pee out the excess. So as we're stressed or as we're older, we're not as good at turning the NAM back into NAD. So instead, we want to methylate it and move it out of the system. This is also why high doses of NAM to drive NAD production can have some other consequences, because you're making NAD, but you're inhibiting the sirtuins at the same time. So the most activating way to go is to bring in NMN and then methylate away the NAM. And so people who are just sort of average to good methylators don't really have this problem. They got enough methyl groups around. And we put in a 1-to-1 ratio of NMN to TMG, and that pretty much holds over, your average methylators. But then if you're not so good of a methylator, you're going to need some extra methyl juice to turn the wheels of methylation. And that could be more TMG. And that was what I first started using, because TMG is the safest methylation driver. It's like the least safe one, or I don't know if safe, but the easiest one to mess up would be at the top of the pyramid. And that would be methylfolate. But TMG is like at the bottom of the pyramid. It's same thing as betaine that's in your betaine hydrochloride pills. You can take a couple grams of that, and it really helps bring down homocysteine, but without, destabilizing things like your folate levels. And so that's what we use. But now I've been using a lot, like for myself, I do a 2-to-1 NMN or NAD gold to B12. Now, when I'm talking 2-to-1, I'm not talking a milligram equivalent. I use the NAD gold. I do 4 pumps of that, and then I do 2 pumps of our liposomal methyl B12, and that keeps it balanced. And I do that for most people, and they do good with that. Unless they're real strong methylators, then they don't need any. Now, we're also developing one called Methyl Charge that'll have more TMG, it'll have B12, and it will have B2. Now, the significance of B2 is that B2 drives the methyl transferases. They found that a lot of the people that they thought were folate deficient were actually B2 deficient.
Oh, wow. I'm learning so much, especially I personally got the whole MTHFR, quote, diagnosis. Although I've heard that like a large percent of people have some sort of mutation regarding MTHFR, like 70% or something. I could be wrong in that number. But I remember when I first figured out about that, I started supplementing with methylfolate, methylated vitamins or B vitamins. I don't know. It just always felt like frustrating. I felt like I would too easily tip into methylation just seems really hard to like address yourself.
Yeah, I think it's because, you're trying to keep your folate levels high, and there's a lot of neurological processes that are tied to that. And you're undermethylated, you're tired and depressed, you're overmethylated, you're manic and angry. And people would just go back and forth, and they'd be like, they'd take 10 milligrams of methylfolate and be like, wow, I feel great. But, and then the next day they'd be trying to kill people. And you don't have those problems when you're filling it in from the base, when you're giving a good methyl base by having a lot of TMG, you're having good transferase activity by having a lot of B2, and you're not monkeying so hard with the methylfolate directly.
Okay, I love that because I started doing the methylated folate and the methylated B vitamins. And I think there's like a reason I didn't keep doing it, even though my homocysteine went down. It just never felt like too much. Maybe I was overdoing it. So I love this is a great new perspective to have with all of that. Another question, you mentioned the methylation potential from betaine HCL. Is that like my digestive HCL that I take with my meals?
Yeah, that's betaine. That's trimethylglycine. And see, you can take grams of that in a day, and it doesn't destabilize you. It just gives you a solid base.
Is there a potential of taking too much of it? Because I take a lot of that with meals. So now I'm just wondering.
I mean, there's always a potential, but it's not like methylfolate where you can easily go over.
Okay. And then, we keep mentioning glutathione and things like that. I have I have 2 like really big questions that I definitely want to get your opinion on. So it ties in a little bit. The idea, because we talked at the beginning about free radicals, oxidative stress, things like antioxidants. What are your thoughts on antioxidants from food addressing oxidative stress and free radicals versus endogenous antioxidants produced by the body? Do you think that taking in exogenous antioxidants, fruits and vegetables, is that having a significant effect on free radicals and oxidative stress? Or
for the water-soluble portion of your world, the inside of the cell, the outside of the cell, the endogenous antioxidants, glutathione, superoxide dismutase, thyroidoxin, glutaredoxin, those do a great job there. bringing in ascorbate helps, and you can transfer reducing factors between ascorbate and all those, and that's all very good. Now, where you're reliant on food-based antioxidants is inside the membranes. And so there's a lot of lipid peroxide stress that can hit the oily domain of the cell membranes. And there you need carotenoids and tocopherols and tocotrienols, the water solubles, vitamin A derivatives and vitamin E derivatives. And that's going to come from your food. In fact, I'm making a membrane formula that's got the different omega phospholipids along with astaxanthin and tocotrienol as your membrane-based antioxidants. So again, you're pretty good on your own for the waters, but the fat solubles, they have to come from the foods.
Okay, so what's really fascinating about that is I think a lot of people, when they first think antioxidants, food, they think fruit. And based on what you just said, the antioxidants are going to be found, vitamin E, fat-soluble antioxidants, that's, like fats.
But like carotenoids and stuff, they're going to come from green leafy vegetables, colored vegetables. It can come from colored fruits. But, people think fruit because of vitamin C. The old orange juice is going to replenish your vitamin C thing.
Is that the main connection, the vitamin C?
Yeah, that's why people think about fruit. Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on like the whole carnivore movement and people saying, that's actually the best way to support antioxidant status with, endogenous glutathione production and endogenous antioxidants?
Well, in that whole carnivore world, for that all to work, you need to eat, as the carnivore doctor says, nose to tail. You got to eat all the organ meats. You probably got to eat the brain too. A little plant will take you a long way. They go a little too far with that. And I like a lot of the concepts in there, and plant stuff can be irritating. And yeah, there's phytoalexins and stuff, but hormetically, those are things that are stimulating glutathione production. And so I am definitely still omnivorous. Now, if you are in some sort of autoimmune challenge and GI challenge, then I would use the carnivore diet as an interventional diet to tone down all the immune hyperactivity.
This is perfect. This is going into my next big question that I had. But as far as tampering down the immune activity, is there an aspect of memory to that? So what I mean by that is, because people often find themselves, I feel like, in a very disbalanced immune system as far as the TH1 versus TH2 dominance and how you're reacting to foods and how you're reacting to life and just everything. Can anybody correct this? First of all, what is this imbalance? And can it be addressed? And is there some sort of memory to this whole immune system where maybe you're always going to be just having to live some sort of diet where you're not sparking the immune system? Or is it possible to reset?
It's a short-term memory. And the memory will go away. If you bring things down and calm things down and stop hyperactivating it, it'll be good in 3 to 12 months in general. And, there may be some longer memory of that and you're easier to trigger back into things, but you just got to let it all settle down and titrate down. My own experience with reactivity to things is that once I got first the AMPK activation, but then especially when I got that NAD on board, man, my immune system just zipped right up and stopped doing so many weird things.
I have heard you talk on previous podcasts. Could you talk briefly about, for listeners who are not familiar, the difference between TH1 versus TH2 and what that means? Because I know people often hear being TH1 dominant or TH2 dominant. So what is the difference there?
We use, in my world, this sort of simplistic definition of it, and it doesn't totally hold up when you get deep into immunology, but the generalization does hold up, and it holds up clinically. And TH1 is more antimicrobial attacking. It's things like interferon production that are antiviral. It's your immune vigilance, your ability to kill the invader. TH2 is more related to, as such, it's more related to your innate immune system. TH2 is more related to allergic reactions and acquired immunity, even though saying that is a little simplistic, but it's more in this allergic reactivity. And when people get TH2 dominant, everything they eat is sending them into a tizzy, yet they're getting an infection and the body's ignoring it. And there's viruses all over the place and Lyme is living in there. So they become intolerant of the things that should nurture them, their food and their environment, yet they become tolerant of the things that they should kick out, the parasites and the evil creatures on the inside. So that's called the TH2 shift. Now that happens very quickly in the face of low glutathione. So how is that low glutathione created? It could be created by a high toxic load. It could be created by an infectious load. It could be created by low NAD. So everything at some point comes back to NAD being one of the weak links and one of the pathologies in there, which is why it's probably the most universal fixer-upper for us.
And with the glutathione, for both NAD and, well, not NAD, it would be NMN that you'd be supplementing with NMN as well as glutathione. Is there the risk with either of those of downregulating your body's natural production of the respective compound?
There's always this theoretical risk, but you really got to jack high levels into there to downregulate your own production. I haven't seen it doing that with the levels at which we supplement. Now, if you're doing testosterone, yes, you do see that. And so then you have to completely replace those levels. And then when you cycle off of it, you have to stimulate yourself to come back up and make more. But with glutathione and NAD, I have not seen that to be the case.
You need to try glutathione supplementation.
Oh my God, you have to. Have you not? Oh, I can't believe it.
So when I was doing chelation with DMPS and IV pushes, I would do glutathione pushes. And that's the only experience that I have with supplementing glutathione. And I mean, that was amazing, the glutathione aspect.
Yeah. I mean, IVs are great, but they just don't last as a supplement. So it's the day-to-day, use some liposomes and see what that does for you. The day-to-day is really where it's at. I mean, the IVs are big interventions and they're big punctuations on it, but keeping that supplementation riding long-term is what really changes things.
Okay. Do you take the glutathione daily?
No, I used to. I intermittently take it. I take it a couple times a week. And if I'm traveling, if I've been up drinking with people, I'm going to supplement. If anything's dragging it down, I'm going to supplement it up. And in the earlier stages of like really bringing myself back, I used to take a lot of it. But, once you get up to a high level, then your body's making enough.
Okay. That's going to be my next one to try and report back on. So that's exciting. So one last question, which will lead to the last question. So given all of this, the status of NAD, glutathione, the immune system, all of these things potentially getting depleted or out of whack, what are your thoughts on, is this all something that must be addressed or can be addressed and aided with, these supplements? What role do you think mindset comes into play? Because I know that people often address immune intolerances or food sensitivities or things like that with, like DNRS or like, a mindset perspective. Do you think that at all relates to all of this?
Oh, 100%. 100%. Gratitude, peace, these things change your autonomic nervous system immediately. They put you into a sympathetic state. In the sympathetic state, you starting feeding energy into the processes of detoxification, regeneration. I've wanted to do this for a while, but I haven't done it. I do a lot of Tai Chi, and I wanted to measure people's glutathione levels before and after weekend retreats. Though we can do that in meditation retreats. There's a number of different ways that we can do that. And I have no doubt at all that levels will go up. And NAD is probably the same. Maybe we'll see it as NADP. Maybe it's just NAD. But we will see these changes. I know Rudy Tanzi and Deepak Chopra have done a lot of work on people before and after retreats, meditation retreats, and they actually split a group and just sent them on a vacation and another group to a meditation retreat. And the biochemical changes were stronger in the meditation group than in the retreat, than in the vacation group. But the vacation group did better than the working group. And so mindset is a huge, huge, huge part of our health.
I love it so much. Yeah, I recently actually had an episode on tapping.
Oh yeah, EFT.
Out of all the like therapeutic techniques, I find the most personal benefit from that. And they recently did studies on it. The findings are just shocking on how it affected gene expression. It upregulated like 70 genes after one session related to like longevity.
That's great. We actually, at the end of the Tai Chi sessions, we do a tapping session along the major meridians. I'll send you a little video of it at some point.
Oh yeah, I'd love to see that. I'd love to see that.
Yeah. And if you just integrated that with intention, it would be awesome. Now, at the end of your Tai Chi thing, you're just sitting there in bliss. And so you're, tapping the bliss into your meridians. But if you wanted a specific intention, you could do that.
This was absolutely wonderful. And I said that was the question that brought me to the last question, because the last question that I ask every guest on this podcast, which will be the second time I've asked you this, but what is something that you're grateful for?
I am grateful to be able to do what I love to do and help so many people and have so many supporting, loving people around me doing that.
That is awesome. I love it. It's wonderful when, it's so fulfilling when the work you're doing is something that you're passionate about and is helping others. I mean, that ties in everything. It ties in purpose, connection, social support. And then when it's about health.
Yeah, I'm pretty lucky that way. I got it all tied together.
That is so wonderful. So this has been absolutely amazing. So for listeners, if you are interested in any of the things we talked about, I will put detailed show notes in the show notes. Those will be at melanieavalon.com/NAD. And also, if you'd like to get any of the Quicksilver Scientific products that we talked about or others, there's a ton of products on the website, which I go on there. It's like, oh, I want everything. You can go to melanieavalon.com/Quicksilver, and using that link, you can get 10% off. So that is super duper awesome. So thank you so much, Dr. Shea. Thank you for being the second timer on the podcast. And maybe we can even bring you back for number 3. I mean, you mentioned at the beginning, like metabolism, and I feel like your new stuff going on there. So I'd love to hear in the future about that. There's just so much. There's so much.
There is so much. Yeah, I'm happy to do it. Love talking about this stuff.
Thank you so much. Hopefully I will talk to you again.
Great. Take care, Melanie.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for listening to the Melanie Avalon Biohacking Podcast. For more information, you can check out my book, What When Wine? Lose weight and feel great with paleo-style meals, intermittent fasting, and wine, as well as my blog, melanieavalon.com. Feel free to contact me at podcast@melanieavalon.com. And always remember, you got this.